Welcome, NutritionRadio.org listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry, University Nutrition Professor of over 20 years and podcast host of long-running shows like Iron Radio. Come on in.
Trends in Science.
Hey, everybody. Well, as the bumper says, it's time for Trends in Science. I'd like to keep exploring that SHOP-23 conference that we explored a little bit last time we handled this topic. It's, again, SHOP-23, the Spaceflight Human Optimization and Performance Summit. It was at University of Houston Clear Lake, full of industry luminaries, important scientists, astronauts. We already covered historical perspective, some input from a physician, from an athletic trainer as far as preconditioning and countermeasures against muscle loss. Space gives us a real opportunity to learn about muscle and bone loss and look at ways to prevent it, at least insofar as they translate to a gravity situation down here on Earth. Again, what's fascinating, I talked about this last time, is not having that gravity stimulus that we all take for granted. Anyway, moving on. Scott Smith was next. He gave a talk about nutrition. I was glued to that one. He was talking about they have two types of work that they focus on, operational and research. Operational stuff could be the pre-nutrition assessments and blood work, things that are necessary to make sure that the astronauts are fit to go. He did talk about doing things like obviously things like protein are dosed per kilo of body weight. Well, how do you know someone's body weight up there? Very neat stuff like using acceleration against the wall and calculating out your body mass that way. They did some really cool iPad tracker apps with this infographic that I guess astronauts love. I think we could borrow from this and use this down here on Earth where there's bar graphs that kind of go from red to yellow to green as you approach your need. For example, 1.2 to 1.7 grams of protein per kg. That's almost just like athletes, by the way. But I mentioned operational and research. On the research side, they're writing grant proposals. They're looking for that soft money. One of the things they try to do is ground-based analogs to mimic flight. So you might have heard about bed rest studies. You might have had a cast on at some point and watched your muscles atrophy. It's that kind of thinking. Even living or existing for a period of time in Antarctica without sun or vitamin D, that kind of thing, or isolation. From an in-flight perspective, they do have to be able to do things like get urine and muscle samples. They have special urine collection devices and clever dilutional ways they figure this stuff out. They know that fruits and vegetables are so important, lycopene, flavonoids. They're antioxidants that help fight against the excess radiation of space, right? We're not down here under Earth's magnetosphere and atmosphere getting protected. You're out there and you're exposed. The challenge, though, is a lot of fruits and veg, they're not very dense if you think about it. They're sort of watery, and we need ways to get those very dense so the astronauts can get the antioxidants they need to protect them from space, the radiation of space. Importantly, though, the point was made during this talk is that there has to be an element of self-selection, of choice when it comes to diet. Only 20% of the diet apparently is self-selected, as I understand it. Mars is going to make that even harder, but we cannot remove this element of self-selection and choice. One of the ways they're trying to experiment with this stuff is simulating on ground. There's something called the CHAPEA missions. You could go to nasa.gov/CHAPEA, CHAPEA. It stands for Crew Health and Performance Exploration Analog. Again, CHAPEA. I wonder how disciplined athletes or people who have dieted hard for contests or bodybuilding would fare in this way. People that are used to eating for utility, they're looking for test subjects and spend an extended amount of time in this analog habitat to mimic the way people are going to eat and live in space. And lastly, just some tidbits from this nutrition talk. There was some discussion about various nutrients or food substances that might be able to help. There was some talk about 1-carbon metabolism and homocysteine and how simple B vitamins may be a treatment for SANS, this optic condition that's suspected to be due to fluid shifts. It's a spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome. My understanding is there seems to be a genetic polymorphism in people's need for B vitamins. Just fascinating stuff. There was some discussion about caffeine. It made me think about all of our coffee research. That could supply antioxidants, like we were just talking about, as well as a performance improvement. Again, if it's not overdone, again, there's a genetic component to how sensitive people are to it. And there was some talk about things that might help bone metabolism on the nutrition side, omega-3s, vegetables being beneficial, and then things like sodium and iron being potentially detrimental to bone. But moving on here so I can get you the gold nuggets from all the cool stuff. The next speaker was on Friday, Captain Chris Cassidy, retired astronaut, full of great stories. One of the things that really stuck with me was a lesson he learned in the Navy SEALs, and that was this quote, "Just make it to the next meal." That is, just live well this next period of time, this next end of the tunnel, if you will. Just make it to the next meal. I like that a lot. Again, great stories from him. After that, we had Mike Stone from East Tennessee State. He is a senior researcher that looks at monitoring explosive strength. Now, not wearable devices. That was a different talk. We'll maybe get to that next time. But he was just talking about like pre, mid, post. Something that he asked really struck me. Does the training program meet expectations? If you don't monitor it, if you don't have the exercise scientists looking at it, you don't really know for sure what the coaches are laying down is working. So I'm talking about hydration, power output with static and counter movement jumps. So you might think like pause and go versus a load and jump kind of thing on a force plate. Body composition, sport-specific tests like ball velocity. I love it. If you don't monitor it, how do you know that the coach's plan is meeting expectations? And you've got to do that pre, mid, and post. If you just do it at the beginning and end, you can't course correct in the middle, that kind of thing. One of the gold nuggets he offered was that weighted jumps, in other words, just using an Olympic bar, 45 pounds versus PVC pipe, is more sensitive to strength changes or fatigue and training strain. That's very interesting. So a little bit of weight on that bar, making it a better tool in a sense to monitor. And the last gold nugget I'll share from Dr. Stone is something that it sort of echoes something that I have said over the years. He put it like this: strength carries co-advantages like increased efficiency and synchronization. What I have often said is when you're very, very strong, everything in life, like your body weight, becomes a joke, right? Everything becomes more submaximal. Similar kind of concept. One of the things he put out there, and I think this is based on the data he's actually seen as an example, stronger golfers even putt better. Isn't that interesting? Okay, and last up today, as we kind of wade through this very cool conference, I just want you to be able to share, was Luke Hughes. He's an aerospace physiologist at Northumbria University in Wales, and he spoke about blood flow restriction research. Very interesting stuff, and admittedly, I haven't kept up on this as much as I should have. I sort of look at it as so inconvenient in the gym. It's kind of hard to, feasibly, practically use day in and day out. But these data were pretty compelling. I did think that he was sort of painting a rosy picture, but maybe the picture is quite rosy. It's enough, I think, to interest some of the space agencies that this could be something helpful because you can train at lower intensities and get similar results in muscle hypertrophy or muscle maintenance. This is just my perception, but it almost seemed like a return to the old bodybuilding theory I used to read about, like in Flex magazine, this metabolic toxin accumulation theory, or like Muscle Mag International, Bob Kennedy. The authors would talk about some of this stuff, that like there's some toxin, there's something that accumulates. That is kind of the idea behind this partly occluded limb, right, by using a cuff up near the body, like proximal part of the limb. It looked like a proximal thigh tourniquet with 20 to 30% of your 1 rep max. That is not a lot of intensity. Potentially with added electrical stimulation 2 to 3 days a week, maybe something that could be very helpful for astronauts to try to hold on to their muscle mass. The idea here, again, is decreasing muscle oxygenation. It creates more forced anaerobic work. And according to at least some data, and I may dig up some papers in the future here on this channel, but there's comparable hypertrophy to higher intensity lifting. Now, not strength gains, maybe decreased strength losses over time, but at least on the muscle mass sort of thing. This is very interesting, right, because of the role of deconditioning in microgravity. It's really kind of disturbing to see that you don't just have a decrease in muscle protein synthesis, but you'll lose satellite cells and myonuclei. The whole structure of the tissue just seems to be on the downward slide. Maybe this is that thing that we've all heard about, many of us, increased growth hormone and IGF-1. Maybe it's a local effect. Whatever it is, they're looking for a way for astronauts not to have to train as intensely, but to get, muscle-preserving qualities. Maybe this has applications, I'm sure it does, in all types of rehab and that kind of thing. And we'll look into that later on the show. Okay, but unless you're a total science nerd like I am, maybe that you've had enough. So we're out of time actually today anyway. If you want to leave a comment, please do. Back up on YouTube, Lawnman07. We're on Stitcher and Spotify and Amazon and Audible and anywhere you get your podcasts. Appreciate your participation just by listening and by leaving a review on iTunes. So thanks a lot. We'll see you next time. The NutritionRadio.org podcast is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, check with your physician, nutritionist, or qualified exercise physiologist in order to make the progress that you need.